Each act of reconciliation brings us one step closer to the beloved community. This is a quote taken from the 6 Steps Towards Nonviolent Change, taken from Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. At the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Coastal Georgia, I normally lead worship on the 4th Sundays, and each year I pick a theme to explore. This year's theme has been becoming the beloved community. And so this seems like a fitting place to end. You've heard it said that confession is good for the soul. While collectively, UA has done some very important soul searching, especially in the areas of systematic racism, we, unlike many other faiths, have no ritual of reconciliation, no weekly ritual of reconciliation or confession. And while our first principle recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of all persons, there is no mention of human perfection in our principles. In many of mainline Christian churches and Zoom rooms this morning, people are praying a confession, recognizing that as humans, we often aren't our best selves. In less politically correct terminology, there's a belief in humans as sinners. I like the way the prayer is expressed in the Episcopalian tradition, referencing failing to love with a whole heart. In the Jewish tradition, their holiest day of the year is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It is a 25-hour period of fasting and intensive prayer in which they atone for personal and national sins. And I'm just postulating here because honestly, I don't know. But perhaps our lack of a confessional ritual is a bit of a reaction to the horrific toll that many religions have played in diminishing the inherent worth and dignity of all persons through shame. Shame that we called guilt, but make no mistake, people were and still are shamed. We talk about Jewish guilt and Catholic guilt, and we make jokes about it. But I think we really should be talking about Jewish shame or Catholic shame, because I think a little guilt might go a long way towards becoming the beloved community. So hear me out. If you've ever read a Brené Brown book or listened to one of her TED Talks, you know the distinction between guilt and shame. Even so, it bears repeating. Shame is a focus on self. Guilt, a focus on behavior. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. Guilt is I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame is I'm sorry, I am a mistake. I think if we can acknowledge our mistakes, perhaps we can avoid descending into shame. Our principle of the inherent worth and dignity of all persons does not abide shaming, but I believe it leaves room for a little guilt. And by that, I mean sometimes a guilty conscience can inform us. Our guilt can let us know that we may have acted badly and we may have something to apologize for. Earlier this spring, during heavy sheltering in place while engaging in a home project, I listened to a 2-part podcast with Brené Brown and Dr. Harriet Lerner, based on Lerner's book, Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts. The podcast focused most heavily on what makes a good apology, and that is mostly what I want to talk about today. We aren't perfect, and frankly, most of us never saw good apologies modeled. Many of us never saw our parents apologize to each other. Many of us never had a parent apologize to us. Did a parent ever tell you just say you're sorry, and after you've apologized, then to proceed to shame you mercilessly? Talk about negative reinforcement. Apologizing isn't simple. It is simple, but it isn't easy. You've probably experienced bad apologies, but hopefully you've experienced an apology that encompasses this 4-part definition from John Cador's book, Effective Apology. We apologize when we accept responsibility for an offense or grievance, express remorse in a direct and personal and unambiguous manner, offering restitution and finally, promising not to do it again. So with this definition in mind, let's explore Harriet Lerner's 9 essential ingredients of a true apology. Number 1, a true apology does not include the word but. She likes to say, get your butt out of your apology. I think this is the easiest piece of advice to follow, but don't get me wrong, I don't think it's easy to do. I just mean that it's easy to recognize. If my apology includes but, I'm not really apologizing. And I think usually if I'm including but, I'm trying to get the other person to feel sorry for me, and I'm not owning my actions. For example, I'm sorry I'm late, but the traffic was terrible. Have you ever said this when you knew for a fact you really left your house way too late and are somehow grateful when you run into a smidge of bad traffic so you can blame it on the traffic when you get there? Sadly, I have done that. Or, I'm sorry I lost my temper, but you were really a jerk. As Lerner says, these are not apologies. Number 2, a true apology keeps the focus on your actions, not on the other person's response or feelings. A true apology might sound like this. I'm sorry about what I said at the party last night. It was insensitive and uncalled for. It wouldn't sound like this. I'm sorry that you felt hurt by what I said at the party last night. The second statement does not own your own behavior. Other common pseudo-apologies include, oh, I'm so sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry if you were offended. I'm sorry if, fill in the blank here. These are not examples of owning your own behavior. 3, a true apology does not overdo. It stays focused on acknowledging the feelings of the hurt party without overshadowing them with your own pain or remorse. This is the time to remember that the apology is not about you. You probably have gotten in this kind of apology at one time or another where you ended up comforting the other person because they became so overwrought. That probably didn't feel much like an apology. Also, you want to pay attention to all the add-on words that undo an apology. The best apologies are short and don't go on to include explanations that run the risk of undoing them. One thing to keep in mind, an apology is not the last time, the last chance that you are going to have to address an underlying issue. An apology is the time to own your own behavior, not address the issues of others. That can come later. Number 4, a true apology does not get caught up in who's to blame or who started it. Maybe you're only 14% to blame and the other person provoked you. It can still be helpful to simply say, I'm sorry for my part in this. Psychologist Dr. Molly Howe says it's a misconception that we should only apologize when we are to blame. Blame and fault are helpful in legal proceedings, but not so much in relationships. It is our responsibility if we've had a negative impact on someone, even when it's unintentional. Number 5, a true apology needs to be backed by corrective action. This is a simple, kind of silly example. Several years ago, I lent a lunch bag to a friend. It was really kind of a favorite of mine. One of my favorite sisters had given it to me. It was one of those kinds you stick in the freezer, and so it kept everything really cold when you pulled it out. Anyway, it was never returned. And when I asked about it, it was pretty clear that the person didn't even remember having borrowed it. I was disappointed and suggested that they, look around for it and maybe they'd see it. A while later, the same friend brought me a new lunchbox. And I almost like it better than the original. The main thing is I felt affirmed and heard by her action, her corrective action. It really meant more than the actual lunchbox itself. Now, these next 4 points are where I think apologies get tough. They get trickier, and especially in really close relationships. Sometimes an apology isn't enough. Sometimes the reconciliation process takes years. Here are learners' last 4 points. A true apology requires that you do your best to avoid a repeat performance. Obviously, it doesn't help to apologize and then continue the very behavior you apologize for. Frankly, this is hard in intimate relationships where I don't know about you, but I at least find myself apologizing frequently for the exact same offense. And I do try to do better, but often I don't. And that is when I hope for grace and forgiveness. Number 7, a true apology should not serve to silence another person, nor should an apology be used as a quick way to get yourself out of a difficult conversation or dispute. Have you ever had an argument with someone on your way to meet friends? I'm sorry. Can we leave now? I'm done. Is not an apology. An apology's purpose is not to simply get forgiveness. Instead, it's a request for a conversation and a chance to take responsibility. Number 8, a true apology should not be offered to make you feel better if it risks making the hurt party feel worse. Not all apologies are welcome. Making amends may be part of your healing process, but find another way to heal if the other person really doesn't want to hear from you. Number 9, a true apology recognizes when I'm sorry is not enough. A serious hurt or betrayal requires repair work over time to restore trust. Sometimes if our goal is to maintain that relationship, we may need to apologize until that person can let go of the hurt. Deep hurts take time to heal, and there is no guarantee that an apology offered will be accepted. So, if apologies are this complicated, maybe we should just skip them. Sounds kind of hard. Well, why? Why should we do this? The act of apologizing is difficult, but it gives us, the apologizer, a chance to live with integrity by accepting responsibility for our own actions. A true apology makes our heart just a little bit bigger. So I've talked about personal apologies, but we know there are many national and global apologies that require our attention. You've probably heard the remark when people talk about reparations. I don't know Native Americans or African Americans anything. They were harmed hundreds of years ago before my time. First, there is this fact. This statement totally ignores the current trauma felt by people of color. So putting that fiction aside, psychologist Molly House says this about historical harms. Historical harms are clearly not the fault of anybody alive today. However, sometimes a person or a group of people have benefited and continue to benefit from inequalities that began in the past. It is a moral obligation and responsibility for changing unfairness to take responsibility for changing unfairness that rewards you. Conservative columnist David Brooks in 2019 wrote a column favoring reparations. Sometimes, he said, the cost of repairing sin has to be borne generations after the sin was first committed. So reparations is a big conversation, probably mostly out of the scope of what I'm talking about today. But I bring it up because I hope we will continue to have conversations on this topic. As we learn to better reconcile with those in our intimate circles, I pray we can expand that circle. Taking responsibility for our hurtful actions, small and large, makes us more fully human. It supports not only our inherent worth and dignity, but those who are with us in this journey to become the beloved community. Amen.